Like in the case of 18-year-old Alyssa Bustamante, a murder suspect in Missouri. According to reports, Alyssa lured 9-year-old Elizabeth Olton into the woods and strangled, stabbed, and injured her throat. She then buried her body in a pre-dug grave and wrote in her journal that it was amazing and enjoyable to kill someone. During interrogation, Alyssa confessed to murdering Olton.
Okay, could have slit her throat and strangled her.
She said that she strangled Olton first, then injured her throat with a knife, and finally stabbed and buried her body.
You strangled her first, until she was unconscious, dead, and then you slit her throat.
Mm-hmm.
And did you stab her then?
Buried her body.
Alyssa said that she wanted to know what it felt like to kill someone.
Did you just want to know what it was like to kill someone?
Yeah, but just wanted to know.
Even after her confession, Alyssa initially pleaded not guilty to first-degree murder. She then took a plea deal and pleaded guilty to a lesser charge of second-degree murder.
Basically, the main reason for accepting the offer was to avoid the absolute certainty of life without parole. If there was another option, then there would have been no reason to have accepted that offer.
Alyssa Bustamante was sentenced to life imprisonment with the possibility of conditional release in 2024, plus a consecutive sentence of 30 years. While Bustamante will spend the rest of her life in prison, how will it compare to the case of 5 students who mindlessly killed a person over a prank? This is McCadden Payne, Trevor Gray, Alexander Miller, Mark Sikelski, and Kyle Anger, 5 teenage murder suspects in Michigan. The 5 students from Clio, Michigan, were playing a game called overpassing, where they threw rocks and sandbags from highway overpasses and scored points for hitting cars. As per reports, on the night of October 18, 2017, 17-year-old Kyle Anger threw a rock weighing 6 pounds that crashed through the windshield of a van and killed 32-year-old Kenneth White. The teens were charged with second-degree murder. The judge declared that the teens would be tried as adults since they showed no remorse after killing Kenneth White.
The proposal for juvenile sentencing is rejected. Lay low for a while and everything will be fine. Only way we get in trouble is if a, and I won't say the word, spelled rats, so you better hope he didn't give in already, or else we're going to the slammer.
White's mom spoke to the 5 teens and said that they had destroyed her life and her family's life.
You have destroyed not only my life, or his life, you destroyed mine and my family, and his family, his kids, and yet you still have not said you're sorry for what you've done. You have sat no remorse whatsoever. My heart breaks, aches every single day since his life has been taken from him.
Kyle Anger, who threw the stone that killed Kenneth, apologized to the victim's family.
I wake up every day with a hurt sadness for my actions. Yes, it was never meant to bother me. I didn't think about what my actions could do, and I will have to live with remorse and guilt for the rest of my life. I have a 2-year-old niece, Melanie, that I look back and think, what if she had grown up without a parent? And the thought tears me up. In time, I can only hope that Mr. White's family and the community will be able to forgive me for my actions.
4 of the 5 teenagers later pleaded guilty to manslaughter and were sentenced to juvenile detention. At the same time, Kyle Anger, who did not accept a plea deal, was convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to 3 to 20 years in prison. He was paroled after 3.5 years. But what happens when you're accused of assaulting your date? Like in the case of 17-year-old Ky'Andrea Cook, a carjacking and assault suspect in Daytona, Florida. According to reports, Cook used an online dating app to lure the victims and set them up for a carjacking. During the attempt, one of the victims was allegedly shot and seriously wounded. In addition to carjacking, Cook was charged with aggravated battery with a deadly weapon. Before the verdict, the judge allowed her to say her final words.
I just want to say that I'm sorry, could have been wrong, that I said I had to be sorry. because I didn't even know you communication. My boyfriend and his friends get and do this. I didn't even know what was going on until I was at the wrong place at the wrong time. I just want to say I begged for forgiveness for a second chance so I can get out and finish school and I can put my mama proud because I want to be her first child to bring home a high school diploma. And I just want to make my mama proud. That's it.
Now Cook would learn her sentence.
Ms. Cook, you're before the court for sentencing. A couple of things going in your favor. One, you didn't hold a firearm during these episodes. The second is that the victim luckily survived. That being said, this was intentional. It was an orchestrated ambush, and you are a main part of that. And for that, I'm going to go ahead and adjudicate you guilty of all 3 charges, sentence you to 20 years.
Cook and her mother broke down in court. It was a sentence much more severe than they expected. The judge said that Cook's actions were pre-planned and orchestrated and sentenced her to 20 years in prison. Cook later withdrew her plea and entered a new one after claiming that her previous attorney misled her about the possible sentence. She received a reduced sentence of 11 years in prison and 20 years of probation. Like in the case of 16-year-old Jonathan Belton, who was convicted of murdering a cop in Detroit. As per reports, Belton was driving without a license when Officer Mason Samborski pulled him over on a routine stop. Belton then lied and took Samborski to a nearby apartment complex to meet his mother. Once there, Belton tried to flee and a struggle ensued. Belton shot Officer Samborski and killed him with his own service gun. First responders said that Officer Samborski had no pulse by the time they arrived.
I checked for vitals first. I found no pulse and no breathing.
He also had a wound in the back of his head.
There was a large wound in the back of his head. Okay.
The prosecutor said that Belton had intended to harm and kill Officer Samborski.
The defendant either intended to kill Officer Samborski, intended to do great bodily harm to Officer Samborski, or knowingly created a very high risk of death or great bodily harm.
Belton's girlfriend, who was present during the crime, took the stand and described what happened after she heard the gunshot.
I saw Officer Mason laying down on the ground and Johnny standing on the side of him with the gun.
Okay, when you said Johnny with the gun in his hand, is that Jonathan Belton?
Yeah.
When you saw defendant Jonathan Belton with the gun in his right hand, did you tell where it was pointed towards?
Yeah.
Tell the jury where defendant Belton had the handgun.
And pointed towards like his upper body, somewhere towards the stadium.
Speaking to Belton, Officer Saborski's widow said that she would never forgive him.
Belton, you shattered my happiness, my hopes, and my dreams, and for that I will never forgive you.
Belton was found guilty of all charges and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He was 16 years old. However, his sentence was later reduced to 70 years in prison due to a U.S. Supreme Court ruling that made mandatory life sentences for juveniles unconstitutional. Jonathan Belton was sent to life in prison for killing a cop. But what happens when you're accused of assaulting your date? How does it compare to targeting and murdering 2 people at random? Like in the case of Dexter Johnston, a robbery and murder suspect in Texas. According to reports, Johnson was part of a group of 5 who randomly targeted Maria Aparece and Hoingo, who were sitting in their car outside Aparece's house in Houston. Johnson and his accomplices forced the couple into the backseat of their car and drove them to a secluded area where they robbed them of their belongings. Johnson then sexually assaulted Aperes in front of No before shooting them both in the head. Johnson was arrested a few days later after police traced the stolen car and found DNA evidence linking him to the crime. He faced charges of 2 counts of capital murder, carjacking, robbery, and unlawful sexual intercourse, with the potential for the death penalty. The jury found Johnson to be a cold-blooded killer who planned and executed the murders with no remorse.
Dexter Johnston, jury is found you guilty of capital murder. In accordance with the laws of the state of Texas, this court hereby assesses your punishment of death. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this is going to complete your jury service. I'm going to meet you in the jury room.
After the verdict, Johnson was visibly distraught, and his family sitting in the gallery broke down. Suddenly, Johnson sprang from his seat and lunged towards the victim's family before being quickly surrounded by officers. He was strained and removed from the court. The chaos spilt out in the hallway, with one family member so upset that she required medical attention. Johnson was 18 when he was sentenced to death. 13 years later in 2019, a federal court halted the execution of Johnson, citing intellectually disabled and therefore ineligible for the death penalty.